Hey there, super friends. This is Joey with Last Point Gaming. Today is Wednesday, January 10th, 2018. If you want to connect with us on social media, you can friend up our Last Point Gaming Facebook account. You can follow us on Twitter at Last Point Gaming. You can follow me personally on Twitter at Stranger Sparrow, or you can always reach out directly with an email to lastpointgaming@gmail.com. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube. I have to fit that in before the email. I always end on the email. So I think my plan for the rest of the week is going over interesting things in the release notes for Rivals of Ixalan, because they are out now. And I did get to look over the rulings on Ascend and City's Blessing, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And, today's Wednesday. Tomorrow, probably going to talk about any other key points in the release notes that I feel kind of need to be put out there that people may not understand, or, aren't expected interactions. There are a bunch of cards where they spell out, there's the one, bounce target creature, and you draw a card. Well, if the target for the bounce is rendered an illegal target for whatever reason, be it removed or given hexproof or whatever, the entire spell is countered and you don't draw a card. That's just kind of how targeting works. Any spell that targets, if it has multiple targets and one target becomes no longer legal between the cast and the resolution, it will move on to the other targets. If all targets of a spell are no longer legal between the cast and the resolution, the entire spell is countered, including any non-targeted aspects of it. So, Vraska's Contempt is a good example of this. Exile target creature, you gain 2 life. If in response, I kill my creature, you don't gain the life. So, a lot of the release notes have to do with that kind of thing, that these are kind of basic rules of the game. Well, not really basic rules of the game, but they're just hitting on rules that already exist. So, probably only going to talk about all that kind of stuff if I run out of other things to talk about. But there are some... just from kind of glancing over the release notes, there are some cards with a little stranger interaction that there's nothing to really, no prior existing precedent to say, oh, okay, well, that should work like this. So I said before that tomorrow I may continue on the community concern issue. I think I said all I needed to say there. You are always welcome to reach out to me, and if you disagree, share your perspective with me and everything, either publicly on Twitter or Facebook, or privately via direct message on Twitter or an email. Again, don't recommend that you DM me through Facebook, because I don't get on that messenger very often. So... Man, dude, you being afraid of life is really boning me here. Come on, you can do it. I believe in you. Focus. I lost my train of thought. I was going to talk about cards that I find exciting, and then found that Taryn from MTGO Traders this week has been working on a series where he's going over all the cards in each color. Now, he's doing one per day, and he started with white, so I don't know where that leaves artifacts, multicolored cards, and lands. I don't know if he's going to do a longer video on Friday and cover all that. I probably should reach out to him and find out what his plan is there. But for the meantime, I'm just going to link to the video he did on Monday on the white portion of the set, just because that's the first one in the series. So... you can follow that link and get to their YouTube channel, and then you can watch the videos he did, because I think he's done an amazing job. going over all the cards, I pretty much agree with what he has to say as far as what's good in limited, what's going to be good in constructed, and what cards just nobody wants for anything. So rather than, just repeat a bunch of stuff he said, I'm going to direct you all there because, then he puts the card up on the screen when he talks about it and everything. It's going to be much easier for you to keep track rather than listening to me spout off my opinions when I can't even remember most of the cards' names. So, the big thing I'm going to talk about today is the Ascend/City's Blessing mechanic. Because it is this brand new thing. I read up on the release notes. I think I remember all of it. If I run into something that I am unclear on, I will make sure that I preface with, this is what I remember, and let you know that I'm not 100% sure. So that being said, let's just get right into it. So, first piece of this puzzle, Ascend as a keyword. Spells that have Ascend, like non-permanent spells, they check on the resolution of the spell. It's kind of like the first part of the spell that goes off. If you have 10 or more permanents, if you do and do not already have the City's Blessing, you get the City's Blessing. Once you have the City's Blessing, it cannot be removed from you. It's an emblem-like effect. And it's one of those things that I guess doesn't actually need represented, so they don't talk about like where the City's Blessing lives. So for the sake of ease, I would think of it kind of like an emblem in the command zone, like a Chandra emblem or a Gideon emblem. Yeah, the Gideon in standard right now makes an emblem. Okay. So, City's Blessing on its own doesn't do anything. You don't, gain a life every upkeep because you have the City's Blessing. Nothing like that. It's just a designation for these Ascend cards to determine whether you get the extra bonus. So, it in and of itself doesn't do anything, which is why it doesn't really need represented. But I'm going to design a City's Blessing token because I feel like you do want to represent it so there's not confusion. So when it happens, you say, okay, I'm going to put the City's Blessing here just so in the future, if it's like, well, no, remember when I cast that one Ascend spell, I totally had 10 permanents. It's kind of like energy. The energy counter doesn't live in the command zone because it doesn't really... The energy doesn't live anywhere. It's on the player. Same with the poison counter. Poison infect damage lives on the player. So, when you cast a non-permanent spell with Ascend, like an instant or a sorcery, once the spell resolves, if it does, that's when it checks how many permanents do you control. Is it 10 or more? Do you get the City's Blessing? And then any other effects go off, because I'm pretty sure all of them, they do something without the City's Blessing. You just get extra if you do have the City's Blessing. So permanents with Ascend on them, that's a static ability. So, you have that 3/3 horse that, as long as you have the City's Blessing, gets +2/+2, and it has Ascend. So, in the case of that one, if you're casting a creature or casting a spell that gives you a token that will be your 10th permanent, your opponent can respond to the cast of that spell. either countering the creature or killing one of your other creatures, or, you know, whatever, to reduce the amount of permanents you have or prevent you from getting a new one. However, if your 10th permanent is a land, if you have 9, you go to play your land for turn, the Ascend mechanic does not use the stack. So when it's checked, and it checks, if you want kind of an easier way to think about it for the static ability, anytime a permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you check for Ascend. Or anytime a permanent comes under your control, you check for Ascend. So if your 10th permanent is a land, they can't respond. If you're not aware, you cannot actually respond to your opponent playing a land. Priority does not pass when you play a land. It doesn't use the stack. So priority only exchanges on the stack or when moving between turn steps. Phases are the big thing, like beginning phase, main phase 1, combat phase, main phase 2, cleanup phase. Steps are the individual things in those phases. So, like, your beginning phase consists of your untap, upkeep, and draw steps. So, because your opponent does not receive priority from you playing a land, you just automatically get the City's Blessing then. They can kill something after you have the City's Blessing, but it won't change the fact that you have it. Beep. Felt left out. So in the case of the horse, that is a 3/3 unless you have the City's Blessing, and then it's a 5/5. If you play a land as your 10th permanent, you get the City's Blessing. They can respond and cast a lightning strike on your horse. It's just going to be a 5/5 with 3 damage marked on it. Well, no, they can't even respond. It doesn't use the stack at all. So they can't respond even by lightning striking your horse at that point. It's one of those kind of more in-depth things on how priority works. So it's a static ability, and getting the City's Blessing does not use the stack. It can't be responded to. And then again, once you have it for the rest of the game. So even if your land is your 10th permanent, and after you receive the City's Blessing, they kill one of your tokens, bringing you down to 9 permanents, doesn't matter. If you're not aware, Ascend will not count things like emblems. Like if you have your Gideon emblem, you can't lose the game as long as you have a Gideon in play. That's not a permanent. Emblems don't actually live on the battlefield. They live in the command zone. Only things that live in the battlefield count as permanent. So that would be artifacts, enchantments, creatures, planeswalkers, lands. I think that covers all of it. Auras, which are a subsect of enchantment. Equipment, which is a subsect of artifact. So yeah, that's pretty much how that works. Which seems in line with the article I had read earlier this week, or maybe last week, I don't know. It happened before this afternoon, and man, my memory is just like all sorts of bad today. I'm like back to calorie counting, and like I think I let that get in my head too much, and so I end up like getting kind of foggy because I'm not consuming enough calories, I guess. I don't know. Moving right along. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say about the Ascend mechanic and the City's Blessing and everything, but no, I think that's it. It seemed like it would be this like really confusing thing, and it's not really. It's pretty simple. Both players can have the city, or all players in the game can have the city's blessing. You know, another player getting the city's blessing does not remove it from you. That city's such a floozy and will just go ahead and bless anybody. Tell you what, I remember when city's blessings meant things. Not really. I'm lying. So, you know, even if your opponent gets the city's blessing, doesn't matter. You're just both blessed by the city. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Wow. That was a lot easier to go through than I thought. I'm having trouble coming up with a token concept for this. I thought like doing like a key to the city style thing, and then I remembered key to the city is a card. I don't know. Key to the city just doesn't say blessing to me. I don't know. Definitely something involving gold because it's referred to as the Golden City. I believe that the city in question is Orzaka. So, yeah. There you go. Let me see if I can recall any other neat things I saw in the release notes that weren't being discussed that I can remember off the top of my head, because that didn't take near as long as I thought it would. I hit on everything, right? Instants and sorceries, permanents, lack of the stack. There is the one blue card. Return target permanent to its owner's hand unless you have the city's blessing, and then you may put it on top of their library. If for some reason you don't want to put it on the top of their library, you can still choose to use the lesser option of put it in their hand. Though I don't know why you wouldn't want to put it on the top of their library, because then not only did you remove the creature from the battlefield, you're essentially stealing their next draw step. I guess if you have a way to make them discard, then after that, then it's like, okay, I'm going to put that in your hand, and then I'm going to watered down Thoughtseize you. So, yeah, there's that. The White Bishop Fiend Hunter style card, even though it's like much less good than Fiend Hunter. It's like 2 and a white for a 1/1. Enters the battlefield, exile target creature, or exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls, and then I think it's when he attacks, he can give target vampire you control +X, where X is equal to that creature's power. So with that one, because I remember reading the release notes on it and thinking, actually, I think it's a creature you have to take. But if you take, like, a crewed vehicle or, you know, something that was temporarily turned into a creature, that's where things get a little weird. So first off, as far as the exile ability, if he is killed with his ability on the stack, with his enter the battlefield on the stack, the permanent in question doesn't actually change zones. Which means, like, if it has +1/+1 counters on it, it still has those counters. If it has an enter the battlefield ability, that doesn't go off because it never actually left. So it's this thing with timing. Same thing with cards like Tide Hollow Sculler and Kitesail Freebooter, that if you kill my Kitesail Freebooter with it on the stack, I still get to see your hand. I get to look at it, but I don't get, nothing actually leaves your hand and then returns to your hand. Because when it tries to resolve the ability, because there's the clause when it leaves the battlefield for it to return where it belongs, or where it came from. Because when the ability tries to resolve the timer for, you know, how long it would be gone until it would be returned has already expired, it doesn't actually leave the zone. It tries to, and it says, well, wait, I can't go under that because it's gone. So the other thing with it is, if you would say your opponent crews their Heart of Kirin to block, and then in your second main you play, it's Bishop of something, you play this, and because the Heart of Kirin had been crewed and turned into a creature, you can target it. In the case of vehicles, you use the power printed on the card, but if, let's say, Manlands were still in the format, if I activated my Shambling Vent to block, and then you play this and you take my Shambling Vent, its +X is 0. Because Shambling Vent doesn't have a power and toughness in its native existence. You can give it power and toughness and turn it into a creature with an activated ability, but in and of itself, it doesn't have a power and toughness. Same with like a land that's been animated with counters put on it. The counters are no longer on the land, and I think when it re-enters the battlefield, it would be a land again. Like, it wouldn't be a 0/0 land creature. That I'd have to look into. That's something I'm not 100% sure on, but no, actually I am, because when a permanent leaves the battlefield, it forgets everything that has altered its state from the original, like its original state. So if it has +1/+1 counters on it, if it's been turned into something else, you know, all that stuff, it forgets it. So in the case of a land that's been turned into a 0/0 elemental creature that's still a land with X +1/+1 counters on it, the counters are removed, it forgets the state where it was a creature, and it goes back to just being a land. So if the bishop is then killed, it returns to its owner's control as a basic force or whatever. What else we got? Man, it's hard to remember because I wasn't going to talk about all this. Oh, so the card that makes tokens good, it's like Gruesome something. 2 and a black, sorcery, which makes it less good than if it were an instant, for many reasons. Not just the usual, well, it could be a cool combat trick if it were an instant, but because they have an opportunity to respond and kill creatures and whatnot. But it's the one that deals X damage, and I think you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control. I think this makes tokens a viable strategy again. And I touched on this before. Okay. Like, what I've been saying about why tokens isn't good now is because there's no payoff to having all these tokens. There's no, you have a bunch of 1/1s, great. You got blockers for days, so hopefully you have real creatures that you're attacking with. But they don't really do a whole lot on their own, especially in a clogged board state, and they're really just fodder for giving your opponent life with a Fumigate. So a card like this definitely brings it into a more viable strategy, where it's like, okay, well, I've got 15 tokens, so I guess I'm just going to do 15 damage to you, because I can't attack for, whatever reason. More tokens need Death Touch. So yeah, I think that's going to put tokens on the board. There's still a lot of discussion about banning energy cards. Taryn actually did a rant video on this today. I also recommend you check out. And it's his 5 reasons for why something needs to be done about energy. Dude, turn off your brights. Yeah. So he makes a lot of really good points. I agree with him completely on this. But one of the points he gets into that I think is valid is WotC is in a bad way either way. If they don't ban it, they're probably going to continue to hemorrhage standard players. Because, yeah, the game's not fun. If they ban something, it's going to push down confidence that much more. But I really hope if they do come out with a ban to try to fix the situation, people remember that every card that has been problematic in Standard and caused a ban, with the exception, I believe, of Reflector Mage, has all been from Kaladesh. Well, the Kaladesh block. Kaladesh had a lot of interesting things that I think had a lot of promise and then just weren't considered in relation to the rest of the things in Standard with Kaladesh. As a standalone block, it was great. It was flavorful. It had this, fun steampunk vibe to it, and it's very balanced in and of itself. Once you expand that, Kaladesh has been warping the format since it showed up. When Kaladesh first showed up, you had the badass vehicles deck that was just murking everything. Oh, that's my last one out of this pack. It was the oppressive deck in Standard. Now, even still, it wasn't near as oppressive as Energy. Energy seemed to take a little bit to get brewed up and put together. And, benefited from certain lands. The Scarab God really took it to a new height because it had the ability to splash an extra color. This guy with this big fucking truck behind me and super bright headlights is pissing me off. I have a headache. Anyway, so I think part of it was stuff leaving the format when BFZ rotated. Part of it was, enough stuff came into the format to turn it from, okay, this is a kind of good deck to a really good deck. Like, Glorybringer made that deck awesome. And then the Scarab God coming in just gave it another thing to work with. But, when Kaladesh first showed up, you had the vehicles running around holding everything down. And you had Aetherworks Marvel. Like, those Marvel decks were disgusting. Like, when they banned Emrakul, I think that's when Aetherworks Marvel should have been banned, and then Emrakul probably didn't need to be banned. Because Emrakul actually wasn't that oppressive, in my opinion. I'd won around it a couple times. Now part of that is playing really aggressive decks that when they take your turn for you, okay, they're going to run your biggest thing into their Emrakul. And that's about all they got to work with because I got no hand. What are you going to do? Not play my land for me? Okay. Whatever. Doesn't really matter. It's not a thing where you can, play my cards badly to screw me. All my stuff's on the battlefield. You get to run one thing into Emrakul. Cool story, bro. So, I guess if you played more of a control strategy, Emrakul was worse. But you could still stop Emrakul from hitting the board then. You just couldn't stop the Mindslaver effect. But for Aetherworks Marvel to not get banned until they banned Emrakul, and they're like, great, now they're just pulling out Nulamog with it. Well, what did you think would happen, guys? You still left this really powerful card in the format that can pull anything. I think if Aetherworks Marvel had a limit, like Collected Company. Collected Company is a card that is still, in top index and modern. It's a great card for like a weenie kind of strategy, a weenie synergy strategy. Because for 4 mana, you get potentially up to 6 mana worth of creatures at instant speed. But it has a limit. You can't just pull whatever, okay, put 2 creatures from these 6 cards into the battlefield. It says 2 creatures, converted mana cost 3 or less. So I think if Aetherworks Marvel had a limit like that, converted mana cost 6 or less. Or 5 or less. Because the other big difference between Aetherworks Marvel and Collected Company is it sits on the battlefield. Collected Company is a one-shot and done. So, with Marvel being able to just kind of sit there and just keep spinning turn after turn, that was the problem with that card, is it had no limit. It could take any, I think it was any spell. So, unless your opponent bricked by just pulling out lands, that was a backbreaking card, with or without cards like Emrakul or even Nulamog to pull with it. Now, Nulamog, in my opinion, was much worse, much more backbreaking than Emrakul. I'm so freaking glad that card's gone from the format. Enters the battlefield and just annihilate 2 when it enters. Well, no, it's worse than Annihilate because they get to pick. Annihilate, unless I'm mistaken, was the defending player sacrificed up to the Annihilate count. Whereas Nulamog enters the battlefield and your opponent says, oh, I see you're stuck on lands. Bye-bye, lands. It's just any permanents on the battlefield, and it exiles them. Plus, his swing, mill 20, he doesn't even have to connect. It's on the attack, not being hit. So even chump blocking him, you got a max of 3 turns. And by the point in the game which they've gotten out Nulamog, probably significantly less than that. So there have been some problems in these 2 set blocks that I feel like should have been foreseen and weren't. And energy is kind of one of them. They needed to give us a way to interact with the opponent's energy pool, and they didn't. But all that being said, I'm finally home. So as always, if you made it this far with me, thank you very much for listening. Tomorrow, I'm probably going to talk about more of the cards on the release notes and that kind of thing, and maybe a couple more cards that I'm excited about. But that's what I got this week. If you made it this far with me, thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to y'all tomorrow.